we're going to be using the JSON placeholder API to build a SwiftUI app that will use MVVM and Swift concurrency to get the data and pretty much show it within the SwiftUI app. So to get a visual of the API, we just have to go to JSONPlaceholder.typicode.com. And we can zoom in a bit so you can see it better. And once you get here, the page will pretty much look like this. The API we're going to be using is the Photos API. So if we scroll down here to resources, we'll see Photos here. And if we click on it, we'll get an example of what the API will look like. So if we zoom in a bit more, zoom in some more, zoom out, we'll see that pretty much it's just each, for the response, is just going to be a album ID, which is an integer, ID, which is another integer, some title, which is a string, and then we have the URLs for the image, the small image, and both the large image, the URL, and then the smaller one, the thumbnail URL. And it looks like it already has the size pretty much added in here. So let's start by just opening Xcode. So we'll jump to create a new project, and we will do app. And for this, we're going to call it JSON placeholder photos. Let's call this MVVM. Just add on some more text. And we won't add any testing right now. We'll add those manually so you can turn off the testing system. Just make sure we have the interface set to SwiftUI and the language to Swift. And then we hit next and then hit create. All right. So I'll maximize this view so you can see it better. And let's go. So we'll wait a while as the preview loads so that we can see that in a bit. But let me put this on the side here. Okay, yeah. So the preview can take a while to load, especially since I have it pointed to my regular device. So I'll switch to like our Pro, 16 Pro Max for now, and just give it some time. In the meantime, though, we could jump back to the browser just to take a look at one. We're going to need this endpoint, JSON placeholder at typicode/photos. We're going to need that endpoint, and we're going to actually need basically a model to represent this data that we have here. So for the endpoint, let's just copy that. We're going to use that in a bit, but let's just look at the UI for a second. Okay, so it's basically just this. And if you're new to SwiftUI, it's pretty much it's honestly way better than UIKit. As you see, like if you want an image, you can pretty much just specify the image that you want. And if you want some text, you can pretty much specify it. So if I should make any change here, it appears in our preview. And all we had to do was just type text to get that. All right, so let's get rid of that since we don't really need that right now. And what we want instead, we are going to want like a tab view. And this tab view is going to have, say, a section for all our photos. And then we will download the data using API services and then show it within this view. So to get the tab view that we want first, let's replace that view, that VStack, with just a tab view. And then we're going to make a separate folder. So just right click and we'll just say new folder. And then this will be photos. We could call this photos view. Okay, just photos. And then within this photos folder, we're going to create one additional view, additional file. It's going to be a SwiftUI view. And I got that fast by just doing Command N. And then for this, I'm just going to call this photos. Let's call it photos list view. Because it's going to literally have a list of all the photos that we got from the API. So now that we have this like this, what we're going to do is introduce this photos list view to our content view inside our tab view. So we'll select photos list view. And then since this is inside a tab view, we're using a tab view here, we can actually add like a tab item. And that will basically be like the bottom section of like whatever, like whenever you go to an app and there are multiple different sections, you can see this tab item. So I'll say VStack. And I'll start it off by doing an image, system image, and then I'll just do photos or photo. And see it appears at the bottom as like our first section, our first tab. So let's add text here. And we want some text below this, and we can just call this photos. Okay. All right, so now we have the basic setup of it. We're seeing it showing in our preview. The next thing we want to do is like, let's build out like a basic UI for it. So let's jump back to photos list view. I'm gonna change the folder name to photos list. Yeah. All right, so now I'm inside back in photos list view. And the first thing I'm gonna do is add a navigation stack because I want to make it that whenever we see the list of photos, we can actually tap them and then navigate to like a detail view. So I'll say navigation stack. And then we will say a V stack. And within this V stack, we'll just have a list. For now, we're just gonna leave it basic like this. What I want to do instead is just build out how we want the row to look. So I'm gonna say V stack in here. Since pretty much whatever you put inside this list will be like the row for each row inside the list, inside this curly braces. So for the row, let's jump back to the data that we have. So the data is, let's see, we have it like this. So come on, let's just grab this, copy this so we don't got to go back and forth. And we'll just minimize this and then reopen this, maximize this again. And the data that we have is something like, I'm just gonna paste this here, but I'm gonna comment it out. I just can't bother to go back and forth with this. And then we're gonna say text, and we're gonna say title. So what's the title for this? Let's just copy this. Okay. And then for the image, which we want to show, we're going to use an async image. We're not going to stick with an async image though, but for now, we're going to keep it. And the reason why we're not going to stick with it is because async images don't cache the data. So each time we'll have to keep re-downloading it. All right, so let's just call this, for now, let's just force it for now, since we're just building out the UI. And just bang that, and we will grab this and just copy this. Okay. And then this is actually going to be like the actual image that we want to show, like, so we can add like, if you want to adjust the framing or the size or anything like that. Resizable, the frame, width, height. I feel like 300 should be at a good height. And then for the placeholder, this is what we're going to basically show as the view as we download the image to show it. So in the meantime, we'll just show like a progress view. And this should be fine now. Okay. All right, so we should be able to at least see like a basic view now. So let me just run the app. Let's minimize this. Yeah. Adjust this. Okay. Now let's run it. Okay, the preview loaded it already, so pretty much the simulator is gonna pretty much do a similar speed once it's finally loaded up. Come on, come on, come on. Okay. Yeah, sometimes the simulator can be really slow, but it should be good now since we loaded it up for it. This is the first time we're running the project, so anything after this should be pretty fast. Okay. All right, so while that actually does a thing, a couple things that we can add to is that we could add a title to the top of the screen right here. And to do that, since we're already in a navigation stack, all we have to do is, okay, finally it's loaded. Okay, so you see it's downloading the image here, taking much longer than I thought it would. We see the list though, it's just taking forever to download this image and show it. So let's just hold for a second. Now we can basically get rid of this portion for now. We can actually switch to like, maybe it's the size of the image, so let's switch to like a smaller image. Let's just delete this for now. Let's close that and let's just switch to, let's jump back to our photos list view. Minimize this and replace it with this URL here. And we'll just load our preview for now, just to see if it brings it up. For whatever reason, it's loading these really, really slow. So in the meantime, as that loads, as I said, the next thing that we can do is actually add a title to our VStack. So we could, to do that, since we're in a navigation stack, we just have to add a modifier. And a modifier is just a way how you can just add an extra feature to whatever the view is. So we'll go to the end of this VStack and we'll start by typing navigation title. And the title for this will be Photos app. This is called Photos app. And I actually feel like we could use a smaller title. So let's do navigation bar title at display mode. And let's just set that to inline. And now you see the title pretty much shrink there. Okay. For some reason, async is really moving really slow, this image, especially with the previews. Let's see if we can load it again in the simulator. Since we loaded it the first time, it should be a bit faster. Might still be sluggish, but it'll be a bit faster. All right, well, it does that. Okay, so the simulator is up. Still actually kind of sluggish, but let's give it some time. Okay, so it's finally loaded. And we see the text, we see us still downloading that image. So we'll jump back to, let's replace it for now with just like a temporary static image, and then we'll jump back to this later. So since async image honestly was just going to be a temporary solution, since it doesn't handle caching, so what we're going to do is, instead of doing that, let's get rid of async image here and switch it to image.system name. I'll set this to photo.stack. And now let's add back the same modifier. So we'll do resizable and we'll use frame and set the width and the height. I will set this to 300. Okay. And then rerun this again. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, it's running. And again, we switched it to just use a static image. So this will definitely show. We don't have to really worry about this, but yeah. So this is how we kind of want it to look. So we want the image to be in the center. We want the text to be more aligned to the left. So what we can do for that is just say frame width, max width, and make it infinity. And then we can set the alignment and then set this to leading. And for now, this just showed that error because I canceled the simulator before doing it in Xcode itself. So let's maximize this again, and now we can rely more on the preview. All right, so let's load up our preview in the meantime. Okay, so now we have like a basic UI for what it is. I think we can add some padding to this. That might help a bit. And so now we have a basic setup of what each row in our list will look like. So the next thing that we can do now is we can actually start connecting with the API to actually get the data from the API. So what we're going to do now is add a new folder, and we're going to call this services. So we'll call this services. And then we'll add a new file, and this will be a Swift file. And let's call this services too. And for this file now, the first thing we're going to create is a protocol. So this protocol is pretty much just going to represent the layout, the features that we want our services class or layer to have. And if we do it like this, the good thing is that it's helped with creating unit testing, so that now we can create abstractions of the protocol so that we're not making live API calls in our testing. So we'll say protocol, and then we'll say API services. And we'll say func, fetch photos. And we'll say async. Since it's going to be using Swift concurrency, it has to be async. And we're going to make it that this call can throw, so we can handle whatever error that might come up. The thing that we're missing right now is that we don't have a way to represent the data that we get from the API. So we need a way to represent pretty much, let's jump to it, our data that we have here on JSON type of code. So we need a way to represent all of this. So to do that, we're going to create models. So we're going to copy this one more time. And we're going to come back to our services class, or services protocol and class. So let me just add a class for now. So class API services info. I'll say API services, and then just do func fetch photos. All right. All right. So the next thing that we need now is, as I said, like represent the data. So we have to create a new folder, and this is going to be for our models. So we'll say models, and then we'll create a new file, Swift file, and let's call it models. Then we'll say struct, and we'll call this photo model. Let's call it model. And we're going to paste this here. And let's just comment that. All right, let's maximize this again. And we're just going to make it that this model pretty much matches the data that we're representing. So we'll say let, so the first type here, the first key here is album ID. And you see that the type is an integer. So we'll just use a matching name for our property and say album ID. And then since it's an integer, we'll make it that the type is integer. And same for ID, integer. Then title, we can make this a string. Then for URL, we actually made it. It looks like it is a string represented here, but we can Swift will understand and make it decoded as a URL. So we can just say URL. And then for thumbnail, URL, we can just make that URL too. Oh, let's get rid of this. Okay. All right, so now we can get rid of the comment since we have a way to represent each data that we're going to be getting as a model. So now let's jump back to our services class. And now we know what we want to return. We want to return an array of photo models. So we'll say photo model. And then we have to update the other function too, since it conforms to it. Okay. Now the next thing that we actually need the URL for the endpoint. So we're getting an error here, and that's because the function requires that we return either throw an error or return an array of photo models. So since we're not finished with this yet, let's just return an empty array. And then we will jump back to JSON type of code just to grab the URL endpoint. And then let's just maximize Xcode again. And then so for now, we're just gonna add it inside a variable, a constant. And then we're just gonna call this photos endpoint. I'll just call it endpoint. And we're just gonna paste this in here. So later on, we're going to be using each of the JSON placeholder APIs. So we don't want to just keep adding different constants here. What we're going to use instead is an enum. I have it handled there, but for now, let's just stick with this. All right, so now the next thing we're going to do is, since we're using Swift concurrency, we have to first like convert pretty much our endpoint to a URL. So let's say guard let URL equal URL. And we're going to use the one that takes in a string. And we're going to pass in endpoint and then do else. And since we're throwing errors, we have to say we don't want to just return. We're going to have to, and I want to have like a custom error one that has like a more readable error message for each user. So we'll say enum service API service error. I will make it an error type. And then we'll just give the first case and just call this invalid URL. And then we'll jump back to here and then just throw an API service error and just make it invalid URL. I know we have access to the URL. So next thing we have to do now is actually use the URL to try and get the data. So with Swift concurrency, to get it, we are returning a tuple with the data and a URL response. So let's start by saying try await and then your URL session that shared that data task. I'm going to have to use the async version of this. So you see it right here, async, and it accepts just a URL. And then we'll say URL. And then from there, the next thing we have to do, since we have both a data and a response, what we want to do is check the response, and we want to check that the response is a valid response. So a valid response could be having a valid status code of either 200 to 299. So we can check that now by first converting the response to a HTTP URL response. So let's say guard let HTTP URL response, and we'll say response as HTTP URL response. And then once we have the HTTP URL response, the benefit of using it like this is that we'll be able to get something called a status code, the status code. And that's what we can check to see if it's between 200 or 299. So to do that check, we're going to do something like this. We're going to check if it's between any of these, between 200 to 299. And we can check by saying if it contains HTTP URL response.status code. If it does contain, if the status code is in between these, then we know it's a successful response. So we'll say else. And then now we have a different custom error that we can handle for. So this would be, say you could just call it status code error or response error. Let's just call it response error. Response, invalid response. Invalid response. And then we'll go here and then we'll throw this error. So API service error that invalid response. And now the next thing that we can do is actually start working with the data that we have. So we can start decoding the data now. Since we know we have a valid response, we can start decoding the data. So to do this, we'll say light and just say photos. And then we'll say JSON decoder dot decode. And we're going to decode it as an array of photo models. And we're going to pass in the data here. Okay. And now pretty much what we have to do now is just return photos. Okay. So there's one thing So one thing that we kind of pretty much missed is we should wrap. So there's a bunch of things that can fail here, and we're not really handling them. So one thing that we can do is wrap everything. So you see how these are marked with try, and then this has to be marked with try too. We have to actually wrap these inside a do catch. So this is for a different error. This is saying that I need to make our photo model conform to another protocol called decodable. And that's just a requirement. If like we want to use JSON decoder on some model, it needs to conform to that. So but before we jump there, let's wrap this inside a do catch. So let's just cut this for a second, and let's just do, and then just paste this in here. And then we'll have catch here. For now, let's just print some error. And I didn't create this error variable here. It's presented to us. Error variable is presented to us whenever we're inside a catch block when you're doing do catch. All right, so now let's jump back to this error. So as I said, it said the JSON decoder is requiring that any model that is trying to decode must conform to decodable. So to do that, we just jump back to our model. So we'll go back to our models folder. And then you see our photo model. We just have to make this conform to decodable. And now this error will go away. Okay. And then it's still, so, all right, so this part, the successful case is successful since we're returning the photos, which is required here. But the error case where we fail, we're not returning any array and we're not throwing an error. So let's update it so that we can throw a custom error based on whatever the error description is. So on this error, it has a property called like localized description. And say it retrieves a localized description for the error. So it just basically give you like a text explanation of what string or explanation of what error is. So instead of doing that, to do that, we're gonna go back to our API service error. And we're gonna add a custom case and have it accept a string. And then go back here, and then we're gonna throw this specific error. So we'll say API service error, dot custom error, and then we'll say error dot localized description. Error dot localized description. Okay. So now that we have this, so now we basically have our API, our service layer kind of set up. So what we're gonna do now, since we're using MVVM, is we're gonna need a way to access this API service and use it to get the data and then pass that data to the view. To do that, we're gonna use MVVM. So we'll go to photos list again, and we already have the view basically set up to handle for one row in the cell. I feel like this image is actually too big, so let's just change this to 200. Okay. And then we're going to actually add a view model that's linked to this view. And that's going to get the data for it. So we'll start by adding a new file. And this is going to be a regular Swift file. I will call this photos list view model. And then we'll say class photos list view model. I will make it an observable object so that so we want to monitor, so we're going to make an API call, and then whenever we get that API call probably is going to take some time, and the view might be already presented before the API call completes. So what I want to do is that whenever we get the photos data from the API, I want the view to re-render it. So I have to mark our class as observable object, and also give it a property called, I have to make that property marked with a publish decorator, and say I'll call this property photos, and then photos, and then has have it match our model. So photo model. I'll just say equal empty array. Okay, and the next thing we have to do now is make it that this photos list view model has access to our service, that service that we pretty much just created in here. But we're not going to have access to app API services info. We're actually going to make it have access to API services, the protocol. And that's the help with, again, with when we eventually write unit tests that will make it that we can fetch the data. We will eventually do mock. We'll make mock versions of API services instead of using like live data. It'll make more sense once you start doing it. So let's jump back to photos list view model, and we'll add that dependency injection, and we'll say service, and I'll say API services. Maybe I should just call it services. And then because Swift handles for autocomplete when it comes to initializers, we can do that. We don't need the photos to be a part of the initializers. We just need services. And because I don't want to have to initialize this for every time we try to call photos list view model, we could add a default value. So like API services, I make this impl. But remember, it's still, this photos list view model still just requires some object that conforms to API services. But for now, we're just giving a default value of this. So I can still use this photos list view model with a different class instead of this, which we will do with the unit test. All right, so now let's add the function to actually get the data. So get the photos. So it's a fetch photos. Let's minimize this for a second. Okay. So we'll go back to fetch photos. Let me see. One sec. All right, so we'll go back to fetch photos, and what we're going to do now is call self.photos, which is what we have here. We want to pass all those photos from the API that we've decoded inside here. Those are photos. And we'll say services.fetch photos. And there's going to be some errors that come up here. One, this is an asynchronous function, this fetch photos. So if we jump back to it, you see that it's an asynchronous function and it throws. So we have to wrap it in a do catch to handle the error. So to make it that this function can be used for it, the first thing we have to do is mark it as also async, right? And the next thing is this API call can fail, so we have to mark it with a try to. And since it's asynchronous, we have to also, so before we do that one, it says the next error is error shown thrown from here and not handled. And this is why we have to put it inside a do catch block. So let's cut it here. And then do, and then paste this. And then let's do catch. And now that we have catch, let's add the await here. And now our error should go away. All right. We'll handle the error case in a bit, but like for now, let's just do print error. Okay. So what we can do now is, so whenever we call this function, we're going to call the API request and update our photos property in our photos list view model class. So to introduce this photos list view model inside our photos list view, we have to add it as a state object. So to do that, and the reason why I want to add it as a state object is, again, is because the API call is probably going to return late, and we want to, whenever it returns late, we want the view to re-render. So we'll start by saying state object, say var view model, and let's call this photos list view model. And then we have to update the preview too. I don't know why Xcode doesn't do this automatically. It might. I mean, I have my AI tools kind of turned off just because I feel like it does too much work for me. Kind of take the fun out of the coding. So maybe it does. I'm just not aware. So for the view model, now we want to call this pretty much whenever the view appears. So to do that, we're going to add another modifier. Again, a modifier is just a way how you can add an additional feature to like any type of view in SwiftUI. So we'll say .task, and we'll say await because it's going to be an asynchronous call. And we'll say view model.fetch photos. Okay. And now what's going to happen is pretty much whenever we get to the photos list view, we will call this, we will make this API call and it will be asynchronous. So one thing that we can do now, before we even add it inside the view, let's just see if we can at least print it, see if it's actually being decoded and print and done properly. So we'll say we could do print and just say photos. And let's just set a breakpoint here and a breakpoint here for the catch block just in case it fails. And let's just run this. Oh, looks like we need to update, or yeah, we need to update inside the content view too, since we made it require a view model now. And we don't have to worry about passing in that services class since we gave it a default value. So let's run it one more time. Okay. Okay. All right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we have to set this breakpoint here. Okay. So once it runs, the fact that we're still inside the do block, that means everything was successful. We do have this purple warning here. It's saying that there is a publishing changes from the background thread is not allowed. And that's because pretty much we're inside the asynchronous function, and we're trying to make updates to the UI from the background. But we can make the fix for this pretty easy. But let's just see that we can see if we can see the actual data decoded. So let's just clear this and let's just step with our breakpoint. Okay, we didn't see that. Another way how you can print some data is using dump too. So let's just switch to using dump and then press play. Okay, and now that we hit that, when you press next, we do see all the data right here. Let's scroll all the way. It's a lot. I think it's like 500. Okay, yeah. So we see all the data decoded. Let me just bring this up some more. So we see all the data decoded. So we know that was done properly. So we can just remove these breakpoints. Let's go. Oh. Can remove this breakpoint, stop the app, and then we're going to maximize again. Yeah. So let's see. So now that we've maximized, so to fix this issue that they mentioned that we're making the changes on the background thread, all we have to do is add a decorator, and that's going to be a main actor. And if we do that, we can remove this. I'll leave it for now so you see it's the same thing. How we run it, you see that we won't see this publishing changes from the background thread anymore. See? And we're doing everything just the same. So adding this, make sure that we update those changes on the background thread. On the main thread, sorry. Adding main actor makes it that we update those changes on the main thread. So let's just stop that for a second. And now we're going to actually add, now that we know we're getting the data and it's decoded, we can use this in our view. So let's maximize this. And then we'll say photos this view. And then we're going to pass in, we're going to use our actual list of photos, our array of photos here. So view model, not photos. And then we have access to each photo. And we'll just say in. And then now what I can do is, just to make sure this is working, I'll change just the text here. I'm going to say photo dot, I think it's title. Yeah, title. Oh, But you see that we're seeing one additional error, and it's saying that photo model requires that we conform to identifiable. And the reason for that is like if you're using any object, if you're using like a model in Swift, like array within an array to like for lists, you have to make sure that it conforms to identifiable. I believe this is so that SwiftUI can keep track of each of them uniquely. So to fix this, we just have to jump back to our photo model and then have it conform to identifiable. The only requirement for identifiable is that it has a property called ID, and that will help SwiftUI identify it. But we for the actual response, like the data response that we got from JSON placeholder, it already required that we had to have an ID property, so we don't have to really worry about that. So no additional work there. So we'll just jump back here to the view, and you see that that error is gone. Yeah, so you see that that error is gone, and now I can use photo.title as a text here. And let's just replace this from now and just introduce the async image, since on the photos model we have a URL. So let's use back async image. I will say photo.url. And then for content, we're going to use the image. So this is the same image that we want to present. We can modify this however we like. So we'll say image. And then we'll say image again. Make it resizable. Add some type of frame and width. So we'll say frame, caps lock, that frame, width, and then the height. I will just make this 200, 200. And then for the placeholder, again, we're just going to use some type of progress view. And now we can, let's pause this and then run again. Okay, so the errors are gone now, so we know that this is running as expected. So let's minimize for a second and then run. Okay, so we got the first image downloaded. And then we have some more here, downloading. Super slow though. And you notice that like, even though I just, we downloaded that one before, just from me scrolling down like that, like look at this one, we have it here, but if I scroll down some more and I come back up, it's being re-downloaded again. So not the best experience. And the reason for that is because we're not async image doesn't handle caching. And it looked like it got even slower with handling some of this data. So to handle this, we could have used a cache system, or we could use a third party. We could build firstly, we could build our own cache system, say using core data, or if you want to keep it simple, we could just use a dictionary and have like the key be the URL and then the value be the UI image. But to honestly, like the best way I would recommend to do this is to just use like a third party library. So for this, I'm thinking that we could use SD web image SwiftUI. So let's just stop this. And then we'll maximize this. And then we're just going to jump to file, then add package dependencies. And then you see, you might not see SD, you probably won't see SD web image SwiftUI here, but what you can do is pretty much, I'll add the URL inside the description, but basically you can Google SD web image SwiftUI, and then you'll get a URL, and then you just paste that URL inside here. Yeah. Just to help out, I guess I'll just bang it out real quick. Let's see. Oh, I have this open. All right, so I'll add this first, and then I'll show you how you can get that URL pretty fast. And then jump right back to the code. So it's adding this. So basically, I'm using Swift Package Manager, which is Apple Xcode's built-in dependency manager, to like add a new library or package called SD Web Image SwiftUI. And that's going to be like what we use for caching our image. But yeah, just to show you how you can get that URL really fast, we'll go back to here, and then we will say SD web image SwiftUI on Google. And literally, it looks like it's the first thing. You can just come here, copy this URL, and then do what we did before. Go to add package dependencies, and then in here, just paste it. And you will pretty much have access to it. I already have it, so that's why I think it's taken too long to load. But yeah, so it will just show up there, and you can just add it to your package. All right, so we're back in our photos list view. So let's maximize this, and we can get rid of this. And what we're going to do now is introduce, first thing is we are going to use the SD web image to replace this and handle caching better. But before we do that, we're going to get rid of this way how we're showing each row in the list and have like a reusable SwiftUI view instead. So let's just cut this. And then we're going to jump to photos list view. We're going to create a folder. This is going to be photos row view, photo row view. And then we'll create this using a SwiftUI view. We'll call this photo row view. And then within here, we will say paste and say vstack. We'll pretty much paste literally the same thing that we had. So we're getting errors here only because we're using photo since we copied it, but this view doesn't know anything about photo. So all we have to do is introduce this here as like a parameter for it. So that photo equal photo model. And now that we have it here on photo model, let's see. Yeah, these disappear, but you see we need to update it too for the preview. So let's just add that in. I'll say album ID1 title. Let's just put title URL, and let's just have it have some string. Let's just say google.com. I know, and let's just copy the same thing, but let's add a bang here to force unwrap that, since it's just for the previews. Don't really need that much, but let's just, we could just grab a URL from our JSONPlaceholder API. So let's type that in again. And then scroll down to our photos resources. And then just take one of these URLs. So let's just take this one. Copy this. Replace it with google.com. Replace this with google.com. Okay. I know what we have to do now is, so we have separated the photos row view from the list view inside a separate view, but we're going to use it still inside our photo list view by just saying photo row view, and it accepts the photo. So we'll just pass that in. And now if we run this, we'll notice that we still see the same thing. So let's just run that again. Come on, Xcode, build. Okay, so almost there. Yeah, Xcode. And this is a really fast MacBook too. I don't know why it's lagging like this. So we're expecting the same thing. Okay, so we see the list, and again, we're still using async image. We just want to make sure that we're seeing the data. Images are loading really slow. That's not sure what's up with them, but you see this one showed up. And again, we have added the SD web image. But if we scroll away somewhere, and then scroll back up, we're trying to re-download it. So now that we've separated the row view, which is each of those cells are rows that had that image and the text in the list, we are going to replace async image here with a SD web image view. So we'll say import SD web image SwiftUI. And then it has a view called web image. And it's really similar to what we have before to async image, just that it does caching. And I think it has some other little extra benefits inside and more modifiers. So what we're going to do now is say photo. It accepts a URL for photo.url. And then for the content, which is what we want the user to see, like the sizing that we want to see for the image. And you see it's really similar to async image. So we'll say image and then resizable, then frame, width, height. And we'll make this 200, 200. And then for the placeholder, let's just make this progress view. Okay, so let's try and run this again. And async image is still loading these images really slow. No, fail to send a CA local endpoint. Is buggy on index PNG. Perform workaround a solution. What does this even mean? So I think it might be the reason why it's taking so long might be this error. Let's see what this even means. Let's Google this. Because I've definitely seen this API before. But all right, the one thing we can check for though is we shouldn't see this image cached downloaded again. So it's called Colpa audio. So and it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th cell. So let's scroll all the way down. Right? And then scroll all the way up, and we should still see Colpa. So we do. So we know that this image is cached, just that the API responses for downloading the image are taking really, really long. So let's see what it's saying. It's saying something about timed out. I guess the request timed out. For some reason, we're taking really long to get the API, our response back from the API for showing that image, not the API, but for showing that downloading that image URL. So let's jump back to this. But as you see, we are doing the caching. We're not re-downloading it, so we're saving some unnecessary API network calls for the user and probably selling data. Anyways, so let's add also a corner radius. So we'll say that corner radius, and we'll make this 8. And what's going to happen is each image there will just pretty much have that corner radius set up. So let's stop that for a second. And then in our photo list view, oh, I forgot I was going to check with this error that this mention that we saw, our warning that we saw in our code just now, in our thing right there. Okay, so what does it say? I am trying to use SwiftUI dependent. I'm loading the coders on upload. Is there a project or user you want to use a specific library? Detected the current is buggy. The issues in the SwiftUI. Huh. Should decode prop 1. But we're seeing this image. We're seeing this issue with async image too. So that's why I don't think it's just like a SD web image SwiftUI issue. All right. So let's just continue, and then we'll work around that for now. So the next thing that we need to do. So we have a list now with each photo that we got from the API, and we're calling it by using this. So the next thing that we need to do now is actually say add a loading spinner to show the user that we're fetching the data. And then the next thing that we're going to do is do some error handling. So to show the spinner, we can do it a really simple way. So let me just maximize this. And we'll add another, so we'll jump back to our photos list view model, and then we'll add a published var is loading. I'm gonna make this a boolean. and set this to false at first. Okay, and then we will say is loading, set it to true first, and then what we can do is add a differ, and basically a differ is like this is what's gonna happen last for this function, like the last thing in this function call. So we'll set this is loading to false. Okay, so the is loading is set to true once we start making the API request, and then set back to false once the API request either succeeds or fails. So jump back to photo list view, and to show a progress view, we have to add a overlay. So we'll say dot overlay using the overlay modifier. And a modifier again is just a way how you can add another feature to add unique extra ability or feature to a particular view. So we'll say if view model that is loading, then we want to show a progress view. And let's give it like some type of title and just say fetching photos. Okay. And let's see. So the JSON placeholder API is very fast, so we might not see it right away, the spinner. So we might need to do a little bit also. We saw it just for a second there. So if we run it again, you might see for a second, but we can hack it so that we can see it right away. So you see it's pretty fast. So let's change this and make it that we don't set it to false when the function ends, when the function as the last thing. So it will just always be true. So you'll see the spinner. Okay, so you see, okay, so it's kind of, I need to add like some coloring. So it's right here, but because it's in these faded colors, it's kind of hard to see. So I'm going to update the view that we're actually showing a bit. So the good thing about progress view is that it takes a label. So we can say progress view, and we can say label. And then for this, let's make it a VStack. And then we'll say, yeah, let's make it a VStack, and then we'll have some text that says fetching photos, same thing. And let's make it bold so they can see it. And let's give this VStack some type of color. We can make it, let's make it a background color and give it a color, just a white. Can we add a border to this? Let's make it gray, maybe. I'm not sure if this part is gonna work, but I'm just testing it out. And then for this, let's do a padding, and let's see how this looks. Okay, so we'll see this big block right here, and then the user will be able to know that we're fetching photos. One thing I want to do too is add like a corner radius. I don't like how sharp these edges are. So to do that, I'm just going to say corner radius, make this 8. And let's run it again. Okay, so it's more rounded now, and we see this update. So we're going to jump back to our view model, and then we're going to re-add the differ so that we dismiss the progress view once we finish fetching the data or fail fetching the data. And then rerun it to make sure that it's what we're seeing. Okay, yeah, so that disappears. And it looks like the data is being downloaded much faster now from the API, from the URL. So we're seeing the images. Nice. So what we're going to do now is stop this. And since we're showing the progress view, the next thing we want to do is actually show some type of error message. So we're going to show an error alert. So just like a pop-up that says, hey, there's an error message. So the first thing we can kind of do is add two more properties. So we can add another Boolean property. So I'll just copy this for now. And I'll call this show error alert. And this is what's going to determine if we should show an alert. And then I'm going to add another property called publish var error message. And let's just make this a string. Okay. And now within our catch block, what we're going to say is error message is equal to error.localize description. And then we're going to show error alert.toggle. And now if we rerun this, well, we have to actually add. So if we rerun it now, nothing's going to happen because we haven't added like any linkage with this property to our actual view. So if we jump to photo list view and we get rid of, we add another modifier. And again, a modifier is just adding a new feature to the view. So we'll call this one alert. And we'll just scroll down to this one that requires just a is presented and just returns alert. And we'll add the binding version of our view model that show error alert. And we know it's a binding variable because we added this $sign here. And because that's kind of what this requested. If we want to make sure, we can just, wrong one. Let's jump to this right here. Yeah, so this is the detail. And I got here by just pressing command and just clicking on the function we want to go to. And you see it requires a binding Boolean. So the next thing now is adding the content that we need for this. So we're going to say alert, title, text, and then we'll say view model dot error message. So what we're going to do now is kind of force the service to fail. So to do that, we could just change S right there, remove S right there, and then just rerun. Okay, so we see our first error alert, but based on it, you can see it's not that detailed. It doesn't provide as much information to the user of what the issue might be. So how we can fix that is we can jump to let's add this back. Let's leave it for now. But we can jump to our custom error that we have here. And we're going to add an additional variable called error message. And we're going to make it a string. And make it that we switch on self. And then for each of these cases, we want to have a different error message that's readable and relatable that links to each case. So examples of an invalid URL, I'm going to say invalid URL. And then for invalid URL, invalid response, I'll just say invalid response. Invalid response. And then for if we have, say, some custom error, we're just going to say something went wrong. And then we're going to use the error that we got from the system. So it's an error that localized description. Oh, this shouldn't be string. This should just be error. Oh, and it's actually a string error. So we could just say error message. And let's copy this. And I know it's a string because remember we did it here. It gives us a string. All right, so what we can do now is jump back to our photos list view model. And instead of using just error.localize description, let's cast this error type to our custom error type. So we'll say if let custom error equal error as API service error, then we would say error message is equal to custom error dot error message. And then we could just pass this inside. Let's just quit this. And then we'll say else. Then just do what we were doing before. If we can't do it like that, then just do the system error. So if I run this now, you see it says something went wrong, operation couldn't be completed. But the something went wrong is pretty much part of our error issue. Okay. So we have a better, somewhat error message that the user can more easily understand what might be the problem. So what we can do now is, let's close this. And one thing you notice is that if we have no photos, it's just like a blank basic screen. The user doesn't know what to do. So one thing we can do to fix that real quick is let's maximize this. And then we'll jump to photos list view. Oh, let's add back the service. Sorry, let's just update our services so it's actually working again. Oh, well, let's leave it for now so that we can see the error and see this experience. So if we're in photos list view and photos is empty, we basically just see that blank screen. So a fix for this we can do is if view model photos is empty, or better yet, not empty, then we can say else do this. So move our code up to the first block. And then for our else block, which is a case where the photos array is empty, we're going to use a content unavailable view. And for this, we're just going to say no photos. That's going to be like the main title. And then for the description, I mean for the system image that we want to show, we're going to say photo. We're just going to make photo.stack. Let's just see what else we could use though. Let's just jump to SF symbol. Just to see what else they have. We might have something else we could use really well. So let's jump this. And let's type in photo. Let's see what photo. I was going to use photo.stack, but let's do something else. Let's use this. Oh, maybe this one. Yeah. Photo badge arrow down. Okay, let's use that. And I love that Apple added SF symbols. It's the most convenient thing, especially when you're a dev that is not good with creating UI or like custom images. So yeah, appreciate that, Apple. So next, let's add some type of description. And this is going to be like some description below it. So we'll just say recheck, refresh page, or recheck your internet, refresh page, or recheck your internet connection. Okay, so now we have that. Okay, so now if you run this, since the service is failing right now, we're making it fail. We should not ever get photos updated. So we can just ignore this. And you see, this is what the content unavailable view looks like. And I'm sure you've seen Apple use this, especially if you go to the App Store, you're going to see Apple using this before. So yeah, so that's that piece right there. And let's just close that. And let's just go back to our services and fix the add bad S so that our API doesn't fail. And let's just run this one more time to make sure it is still not failing. Okay, all right, cool. And we see SD Web Image SwiftUI doing its thing. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, none of those top 3 images that were downloaded are going to be re-downloaded again. Okay, yeah. All right, so we are good with that. So the next thing that we want to do is one feature that, like, you know, people do it all the time without even thinking, especially myself, is pull to refresh. And the easy way how to do that in SwiftUI is to just add a refreshable modifier. So I'll say refreshable. And what do we want to happen basically is we want to get the data. So we can just say await. So we're going to call it pretty much the same thing that we have in our task. And this is asynchronous, so we're good. So await view model that fetch photos. Let me just check that it is asynchronous. So we'll do command click. And yeah, it is asynchronous. So we see the asynchronous tag there. So let's go back now. And then like if we load our preview, and as the preview loads, what we're going to be able to do now is just basically just do a pull to refresh. and that's gonna make another API call to get that data. So as you see where it's dragging, you see that spinner at the top. And if I let it go, basically the API call was remade again. And you even see the fetching photos view. So let's reduce the roundness on that view and just the photos view on the progress view. And let's try calling this again. Okay. All right, so now the user is able to, they know that some data is loading. They will see error messages if some issue should occur. And they will also be able to see the progress view, get the data, and show it inside the view. So let's pause this and then rerun it again. And we're using dependency injection in our view model so that we'll be able to handle unit testing much easier. So the next thing that we could do now is start adding some amount of accessibility features. So let's see what we could do here. So for our photos row view, we pretty much just have some text and so forth. But we don't really care. Like in certain cases for accessibility, it's usually recommended that you ignore images or certain things like that that might not be beneficial for users that are using voiceover because they basically hear the name of the image versus seeing it. So what you can do is add a modifier called accessibility. Accessibility. I think it's accessibility not hidden. Accessibility hidden. Yeah, we can just set this to hidden. And then set this to true. I think you can just do this. Hold on. And what will happen is when we're using voiceover, it just will skip over this. Access hidden. Oh, that one got deprecated, I see. Okay, so just say hidden true here. And then what other place are we using that we might need to ignore? It's kind of mainly this one. And how we can test to see if this is being ignored by VoiceOver is we can jump to Xcode up here, then open Developer Tools, and then Accessibility Inspector. And then switch our inspector to be our simulator, the device that we want to inspect. And let's just run it again. And then we're going to run our accessibility inspector on our simulator. And we're expecting that the image will be ignored each time. So we're fetching the data, and then let's just run this. So it highlights each cell in the view. Oh, it's seeing each cell as just like a whole element. Let's just press play. Okay. So photos, app. And then the next piece is, yes, it's highlighting each as the cell it's highlighting the entire cell. And I believe this is because if we jump back to photos row view, let's remove our accessibility hidden and let's just see how it was behaving originally without that. Okay. All right. So now let's do next. Yeah. So it's handling just based on cell. And it's so it's automatically ignoring the image as well. So it's not highlighting any of the images, but you see the thing that comes into context is still the title. So it's behaving as expected. I'm wondering if it's because web image automatically has accessibility hidden on it. But right now we are good because it's ignoring that feature. So I can pause that and we won't need to add accessibility hidden here anymore. Let's see if we can actually see what this is. see more about how they're doing this. So this portion is public, but the rest, like the more detailed portion of the code, probably isn't public. So it's all good. So we can hop back here. What we're gonna do now is start by adding some unit tests. That way we can test our view model. So what we need to do is add a new target. So let's stop this. And then we're gonna go up here and say new target. Oh, we can actually just say unit testing bundle, yeah. And we're gonna call this our photos view model test. Oh, actually, no, let's just call this should actually be this. And then for testing system, we're not going to be using Swift testing. I will be doing a different stream on that just as we practice that, but we're going to be using XC test. Excuse me. And then we'll say finish. Now what we will do is jump back to our actual XC test class. And then we have some boilerplate code here. We don't really need all this, so we'll get rid of that. And now the first thing that we need to do is we're going to use this to test our view model. So let's say, so the first thing that gets called whenever we are in a test, XCT test, is this function called setup. And then the last thing that gets called is our teardown, is this teardown function. So that's where if we want to do any cleaning up or creation, we do it in each of those. So let's add the setup function. Func, and then we'll say super.setup, so it does whatever it has to do before. And then we'll add the teardown function. And then we'll make it do whatever it does at the end. And now what we're going to do is, since we want to test our view model, we'll say view model, and then say photos view model. But you'll notice that we can't find it, and that's because we need to import it. So XC test needs to get access to our project. To do that, we're going to say add testable, and then we're going to import JSON placeholder photos MVVM, and then we're going to update. Now we'll be able to find photos list view model, and let's just make this a bang since it requires pretty much this. It requires pretty much this property. So photos list view model. Okay, and now let's add another property. This is going to be our service class. But remember, we don't want to use our live services inside our API class. What we want to do is use like a mock version of it, but we still want to be able to test all the logic that's happening around it and in it. So we're seeing an error here. Oh, I don't think we'll be cool with this being a variable too. Yeah, because we're going to set it. So we'll say var photos list view model. And then within photos list view model, our view model requires a service. So we'll say photos list view model. And we don't want to use the the default initializer one, because remember that one uses a live service, the real actual API services. And we don't want to do that. We just want to create some mock class that conforms to this, that can kind of do something similar. So to do that, we're going to create, so we have to pause right here. So let's just comment this for now. And then we're going to jump to our test function, to our test folder, and we're going to create a new folder and call this mocks. And then we're going to create a new file as well and call this mocks. Well, a Swift file, not a SwiftUI file. Call this mocks. And then we'll just go here and we'll say class mock API service impl. And then we're going to make it conform to API service. But remember, this file as well doesn't have access, even though we did it in the previous file. This file doesn't have access to our project. So to do that, again, we have to add testable, and then import testable, and then import JSONPlaceholder photos mvvm. Now, when we try to conform, and we say API services, we go here and then we say fetch photos. We will now have a mock version of our services class. So it's similar to this, but it's not going to use any real data. It's not going to be using this endpoint or anything like that. So what we can do now is we want a way how we can inject some mock or fake photo models. So, and we want to be able to test for, say, a particular type of error. So we'll say var, and we'll say photos result, and let's call this result, and let's make it an array of photo models. And then the error that we're going to take is a service error, API service error, and let's make it optional. And since it's a result, what we can do is we can actually switch on this result, because result is pretty much just an enum. So we can say switch on photos result. So whenever we call fetch photos, the mock version of it in our unit testing, we'll be able to switch on photos results. And then in this case, we will have a success case, which will return the photos, and then a failure case, which will return some type of error. So this nil case is pretty much won't happen, but Swift adds it as like a backup. So we can just throw a custom error and just call this unknown. And then for failure, in the failure case, we want to throw an error because that's how we set it up. And then in the success case, we want to return our photos. So now we have our mock API service set up that we can use it. And then we'll jump back to our view model. And we're going to add one more property here. We're going to add service mock service. And then we'll make this actually be a type of that, of the actual concrete class versus the API versus the protocol. And then in here, I'm going to say service mock service. Mock service, and then we're going to set it equal to mock API service implementation, and then we're going to use mock service in here. And then what we want to do when the tests are finished is actually clean up everything. So we could say view model is equal to nil, and then we can make mock service equal to nil too. Nice. All right, so for our actual unit testing, what we're going to do, I'm going to put, let's just put it at top. It's kind of weird doing that. I thought that would be neat, but let's just put it right here. So for actual unit testing, every function that we're making that's going to be unit test should start with the name test. And usually unit tests have longer names, so just a heads up. The func test successful API call. Successful test fetch photos successful, test fetch photos successful, and we will say for the unit testing, usually I like to follow the approach of like given, and then we could be like when, and then. So given is going to be like based on some mock data that we have, and then when it's going to be like based on that mock data, when we do some action, and then it's going to be you checking to see if the results after the action are as expected. So the first thing we have to do now is you call our mock service, and then you remember that result property that we had, the photos result. We need to set we want to use a success case for that, but it requires some photo array of photo models. So we're going to make a quick set of fake data. So we're going to call mock photo. And we're going to call this photo model. Let's just play with this mock one, URL string. Let's just do google.com. And let's just do a bang here. And grab that URL and then do the same thing here. So now we could just use this, but let's just add one more mock photo variable. So I'll say mock photo 2. And let's just adjust the values a bit. We can leave Google as well. So now in our success case that we're gonna give to our fake mock API service, we're gonna say mock photo, and then we're gonna do mock photo 1, mock photo 2. And now, so this is our given. So given this data, these changes, this update, what do, and let's just move this up here. Given this data, the when is going to be some action, and pretty much the main thing that this is testing again is a successful fetch photos. So it's usually going to be like, so it's going to be like view model that fetch photos, and this is async, so it's going to ask us to write await, and it's also going to require that our function handles await. Yeah, so it's an async call in a function that does not support concurrency. So I have to say async here. Now we'll get rid of that error. And now after fetching our photos, now we can do what we want to check for. So we want to check that one, or view model that photos property isn't empty. So we can check that. And we want to check that the count is actually 2. So assert false. So we say view model that photos is empty. So that should be false. Let's run this one first, and like we automatically see this diamond, and this is how you can run each individual case. When we add more functions, you'll be able to just tap this diamond and run all your cases. So I've had experiences where this wouldn't show up, and usually it's because test isn't here. So just remember to check that. So let's just run this now, and let's see if our unit tests are successful. And then we'll add some additional tests, but these will be mainly for in failure cases. So how do we handle when the fetch photos actually fails? So our unit test is testing and running now. And let's see, we can minimize this so we can see, you'll see the simulator start flashing to different screens as we run our tests. And it created actually a clone version of that. So we're waiting for the clone to finish up. Installing. Let's see. Oh, we can minimize this so you can see more of the actual code feel. So yeah. So while that test runs, we can look at like possible some other things that we might want to test. So we're going to want to test to see if it's actually, as well as even though it's not empty, we want to make sure it's only 2 elements. We want to check so test succeeded, as you see there. So yeah, so the other thing we want to test for is that it's actually 2 elements in the array. We want to test the elements, the values for the properties inside each model. We want to check that too. So let's say XCT. And we'll say XCT assert equal. So XCT assert equal. I will say view model dot photos account. I will assert that that's actually returning 2, because that's what we're expecting the value to be. Now, after doing this, So we have the data. Let's see if we can check if the data is what it is, or if what we're expecting. So we'll use XCT assert again. We're going to be using this pretty much all the time for our unit tests. So XCT assert equal, and then we'll say view model photos 0 title, and then our title should be Mach1. So we'll check that it's that, and then let's check the second element too, and let's just set that to 1, and let's just change this to 2, and then we'll rerun our test again. Okay. And you see that tests do pass still. So we're good in that section. So the next thing that we can test though, so we know that these values are good. I'm pretty sure these are going to be good too. And I'm pretty sure these are going to be good. What we can do now is also check that the is loading is false. And we can check that the error cases are empty. So we can check those right now. So XCT assert if false, and we'll say view model that is loading. You can check that that's false. Also, what we can do is check that XCT assert that view XCT that assert false, and we can check that view model that show our error alert is false, and then XCT assert equal. This is a weird way to do this, but I feel like I'm using false too much. So I'll say view model that error message is equal to an empty string. So let's run our test with these new updated asserts and checks that we're going to do. And this is giving us a warning because it's saying, oh yeah, so all our tests pass, but this is giving us a warning because it's saying we haven't mutated mock photo, so we can use a let. Use it as a constant, so let's just change that. Don't want to see that warning the entire time. And we can pretty much say, oh yeah. And we can pretty much say this is pretty much how we've completed it for, at least for this portion, our successful case. In the next stream, we'll kind of look at doing it for our failure case, and this will handle that scenario. But if you like it, just like, subscribe, and yeah, we'll add more. So it'll be heavy using SwiftUI along with Swift with MVVM. Okay, so let's jump here. So we added the first unit test. What we want to do is add more and keep updating as we go. So yeah.